In the spring of 1981, doctors in Madrid began noticing something deeply unsettling happening in their hospitals. Patients were arriving with a strange and severe illness that did not resemble any known disease circulating at the time. Entire families were appearing in emergency rooms all together, complaining of intense muscle pain, high fever, and an inability to breathe. Doctors were baffled, but the strange cause behind the disease would lead it to become known as the toxic oil disease. It's perhaps helpful to start with the symptoms and the peculiarities of toxic oil disease. At first, physicians believed that they were facing an unusual outbreak of pneumonia. The symptoms appeared to be respiratory in nature, and many patients required oxygen therapy soon after admission. Early symptoms included fevers, a dry cough, and chest pains. But the disease did not behave like pneumonia. The pattern was too unusual, the progression too erratic, and the disease affecting entire families at a time seemed too consistent to be explained by a typical infectious outbreak. As the disease progressed, people were struck with persistent muscle, nerve, and joint pain. Their muscles would weaken, and their skin would become hard, covered in rashes, and stiff as their blood flow dropped. Some even began to suffer with pulmonary hypertension, developed chronic breathing problems, and fatigue lasting months or even years. In the worst cases, people developed blood clots, respiratory failure, and death. Within just days of the first cases, hospitals across Madrid began reporting more and more patients dying with identical symptoms. Some deteriorated with alarming speed, including a 7-year-old boy who died shortly after arriving at the hospital, suffering from respiratory distress and a rash. The case was one of the first signs that doctors were confronting something far more serious than a routine illness. Doctors treating these patients during the crisis described hospitals overwhelmed with cases that appeared almost identical. Emergency departments filled with individuals struggling to breathe or complaining of severe muscle pain. In some wards, several family members of the same family occupied adjacent beds, all suffering from the same unexplained illness. By the time the health officials realized an epidemic was unfolding, hundreds of people were already sick. But what made the situation especially disturbing was the way the illness seemed to affect entire households simultaneously. Doctors were dealing with cases where every member of a family, parent, child, and even grandparents all fell ill within a very short period of time. This pattern immediately suggested that the illness might not be contagious in the traditional sense, but rather connected to something that the victims were all being exposed to inside their homes. During the early weeks of the outbreak, however, that connection had not yet been discovered. Medical staff focused on treating the symptoms in front of them, which were often severe and sometimes fatal. Doctors eventually recognized that the disease often unfolded in 2 stages. The first stage resembled an aggressive form of pneumonia, characterized by fever, coughing, and breathing difficulties. But patients who survived this stage sometimes appeared to improve, only for a second phase of illness to begin just weeks later. During this second phase, many victims developed chronic muscle pain, nerve damage, and profound fatigue. Some experienced long-term disabilities that prevented them from walking normally or performing basic physical tasks. As the weeks passed, the number of deaths just continued to rise. By August of 1981, Spanish health authorities confirmed that the epidemic had already claimed 100 lives. Many of the victims died in hospital intensive care units after days or weeks of struggling to breathe. The victims were not confined to any single age group. Teenagers, young adults, and the elderly all appeared among the dead. In November of the same year, the official death toll reached 200. Doctors struggled to find anything resembling a cure for this mystery illness. All they could do was support the patient and try and manage the symptoms the best they could. While doctors fought to save patients, epidemiologists from Spain's public health system began conducting an urgent investigation into the cause of the outbreak. Their first priority was to determine whether this disease was contagious or not. Teams interviewed patients and their families, collecting detailed information about travel histories, occupations, food consumed, and household conditions. It's when this happened, gradually, a pattern began to emerge. Many of the victims lived in working-class neighborhoods around Madrid, and a surprising number of them reported purchasing cooking oil from street vendors rather than supermarkets. The oil was sold in unmarked containers, often in plastic bottles without labels, and it was significantly cheaper than genuine olive oil. For families struggling financially, this lower price made it an attractive alternative. At first, the connection seemed weak. Cooking oil was such a common household product that it appeared unlikely to be responsible for a disease this severe. But the more investigators examined the cases, the stronger the link became. Eventually, they concluded that this mysterious illness was not an infection at all, but a form of mass poisoning linked to, of all things, contaminated cooking oil. In the 1970s, the Spanish government sought to protect its own olive oil industry. It banned the import of cheaper oil used in cooking, but allowed the import of canola oil for industrial use for the lubrication of machines. But some people imported this industrial-grade canola oil with the intention of passing it off as olive oil. The dangers of consuming this industrial oil was that it was denatured, meaning it was rendered unfit for human consumption, with a chemical called aniline. This is a common practice for certain chemicals and oils, clearly marking them as not fit for human consumption and allowing them to avoid higher taxes or import fees. This discovery led investigators to uncover a mass criminal supply chain operating within Spain's food markets. Somewhere along the distribution chain, traffickers decided to exploit the oil for profit. They processed the industrial oil to remove the residue used to mark it as industrial. Then they illegally sold it to vendors who just marketed it as cooking oil. And in some cases, sellers even claimed that the product was olive oil, allowing them to distribute large quantities at a fraction of the legitimate price. Thousands and thousands of liters entered informal markets, whilst door-to-door salesmen targeted the poorest neighborhoods throughout Madrid. Families purchased the oil without realizing it had originally been manufactured for industrial purposes and contained deadly chemicals. Once inside the home, it was used exactly like ordinary cooking oil, heated in frying pans, added to stews, and consumed as part of everyday meals. But each meal exposed the victims to toxic substances. By the time the authorities identified the contaminated oil as the source of the outbreak, the scale of exposure was already enormous. Estimates later suggested that roughly 100,000 people had consumed the oil, and of these, around 20,000 developed clinical symptoms of what became known as toxic oil syndrome. More than 10,000 people required hospitalization during the peak of the epidemic. The illness itself proved to be unusually complex, producing a wide range of symptoms that varied from patient to patient. Although many patients survived the initial illness, recovery was often slow and incomplete. Some remained hospitalized for months, while others left the hospital only to discover that the disease had permanently altered their health. But in the most serious cases, the poisoning caused long-term damage to the immune system and the nervous system. Some survivors developed chronic neurological disorders, while others experienced permanent physical disabilities. Many were left paralyzed, leaving patients bed or wheelchair-bound. Official figures indicate that approximately 300 people died during the initial outbreak in 1981. However, the long-term consequences of the poisoning would continue for the years that followed. Medical studies that tracked victims over time found that many later died from complications directly linked to the disease. One medical analysis recorded more than 1,600 deaths among patients affected between 1981 and 1994. Survivor organizations have argued that the ultimate death toll may be even higher still. Their estimates go as high as 5,000 people, potentially dying from the long-term complications over the decades that followed. Beyond the immediate medical crisis, the outbreak had a profound impact on Spain. Because the contaminated oil was primarily sold in lower-income neighborhoods, the victims were largely drawn from working-class communities. Entire apartment buildings contained multiple households affected by the poisoning, and the nearby hospitals struggled to manage the sudden influx of patients. In these areas, schools lost students, workplaces lost workers, and many families were left coping with chronic illnesses or disabilities among their members. Once investigators confirmed the cause of the epidemic, the Spanish government launched a massive effort to remove the toxic oil from circulation. Authorities introduced an exchange program, allowing citizens to trade suspicious oil for safe cooking products. At the same time, law enforcement agencies began arresting individuals involved in the production and distribution of the illegal oil. More than dozens of people were eventually detained as part of the investigation, including oil importers, refiners, distributors, and even some public officials and inspectors. From 1987, the Spanish courts dealt with one of the more complex cases as dozens of defendants faced charges related to the production, distribution, and sale of the toxic oil. The court proceedings lasted almost 2 years as investigators presented evidence about how the industrial oil had been processed and sold to unsuspecting customers. It showed how they fraudulently mislabeled the oil and heard evidence from leading scientists that squarely laid the cause of the disease at the contaminated oil. Nevertheless, the courts refused to rule whether or not the contaminated oil was truly the cause, and they could not determine what chemical or toxin in the oil was to blame. As a result, it was hard to know at which point in the supply chain that the deadly chemical may have been added to the oil. None of the defendants were convicted of murder, though plenty were sentenced to crimes including fraud, posing a risk to public health, and reckless harm. But because those involved did not intend to harm any of the consumers of the toxic oil, no one was held accountable for the deaths of the hundreds, if not thousands, of victims. For many victims and their families, however, the legal outcome provided little sense of closure. Thousands of people continue to suffer from the lasting effects of the poisoning, and survivor groups spent years campaigning for medical support and financial compensation. Even decades later, toxic oil syndrome remains one of the most disturbing food safety disasters in recorded history. The outbreak demonstrated how a single contaminated product, introduced quietly into everyday commerce, could poison tens of thousands of people before the authorities even understood what was going on. It led to a massive shakeup of Spain's public health authorities. They cracked down on the informal sales and black markets that peddled the dangerous oil. Toxic oil syndrome is a disturbing example of how a mundane act, like purchasing a bottle of cooking oil, can lead to the deaths and chronic illnesses of thousands of people. It's a grim reminder just why food standards exist.